Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Nau mai, haere mai, welcome to the Early Childhood Seminar Series. We'll begin our time together with a karakia. Me inoi tātou. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa ponamu te moana, hei huarahi mā tātou I te rangi nei. Aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou I a tātou katoa. Haumie, huie, tai kie. We're delighted to have you with us today for a presentation by a team of researchers from Papatoetoe North Primary School, the University of Auckland and Auckland University of Technology, who have been working together on a teaching and learning research initiative project titled Understand Me, Crafting Selves and Worlds in Collective Storied Conversations with Tamariki, whānau and kaiako. The recording of this presentation will be available on our Early Childhood Seminar Series YouTube channel after the seminar. Please do use the chat function to connect with each other and the panelists. If you have any questions for the presenters that arise in response to their presentation, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask them, and the team will respond to them at the end of their presentation. I will now pass over to Dr. Esther Fitzpatrick to welcome and introduce our speakers. Kia ora, Esther.
Kia ora, Justine. Tēnā koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Ko Esther Fitzpatrick tāku ingo no Opotiki I ukaipo aho ke titirangi tāku kaianga. The title today is Understand Me, a chronology of nested stories, interweaving pathways of understanding between young children, families and teachers. This looks like a fabulous collaboration between colleagues and scholars, many who I've had the privilege of working with and who continue to inspire me. We've got Deputy Principal Mariata Morgan from Papatoetoe North School. Welcome, Mariata. We've got Professor Jan Gaffney from the University of Auckland with the lovely doctoral candidate Alison, who I've had the privilege also of working with. And then we have these fabulous two from AUT, Dr. Meg Jacobs and Associate Professor Jacoba Matapo. Just so exciting. As someone who is deeply invested in the importance of stories and storying, I'm looking forward to your presentation, which you describe as a story of stories, and that you were gifted to share on behalf of children, families and teachers. These stories are their stories, shared in conversation to show a glimpse of their worlds for children's well-being and to reach beyond themselves to benefit others yet to come. So looking forward to this, and we'll talk more at the end. Remember, if you have questions, to put them in the Q&A. And handing over to you, Jacoba Matapo Eho.
Ma lole sui fua, whawhatai tele lava mole nei awanoa, ia whawhatai fui ia oi Esther Fitzpatrick. Ma lole lei, ni sa bolivinaka, ta lo hani, whakalofalahi atu, kia orana, kia ora koutou katoa, ma lole sui fua ma le langi mama, awhio mai, susu mai, malio mai, tala mai, our warm Pacific greetings, and we invite you to journey with us through our Understand Me storied conversations.
The slide that's up shows our collective, and you will notice that Papatoetoe North is in the middle and bounded by the University of Auckland and Auckland University. Today, we are going to talk about Understand Me at Papatoetoe North. We also want to acknowledge our partners, our funding partners at Auckland Airport Community Trust that took a risk on us. We are the first research project they have funded. Their pilot data were able to help us write a substantial proposal for the TLRI. This project grew out of a puzzle. We were teaching postgraduate and master's level courses, and the teachers were showing that they were able to have awareness of cultural and family competence and a strength-based way of thinking. What we were finding more challenging was how to shift to a call for action. So a few of us, Meg Jacobs, Nola Harvey, and Dr. Towahe Tamati at the beginning, we had this ideation phase where we were really searching for a different way of seeing, especially when the language, culture, and experiences of the children were distant from a child and their family. A quote from Judge Andrew Beecroft, then the Children's Commissioner, grew out of a study that they did in 2018. And in that study, in an interview, a young Māori boy, when asked about what he wanted from his teachers, he said, if they can't understand me, how can I understand them? Understand me was born from that quote. We had relational principles that were our guideline for this project. We wanted a project that was intentionally relational, that we knew that the schools and centers that partnered with us needed to already be on the path. They couldn't start from stop. We wanted to enter their worlds as witnesses of their stories and view their stories as taonga, as treasures, and invite reflection back on their shared stories. We craft ourselves and our worlds in stories. These research questions grew out of that statement. The first question addresses the essence of understanding through storied conversations. The second one is grounded in knowings and how for us as teachers to notice and the knowings of children and families, how does that forge a pathway from home to permeate and shape the school curriculum? And in the final question, we were really addressing tensions that arose between the relational and the quantifiable, which often we are called for. We went to Papatoetoe North School because honestly, we were looking for a school on the path, and multiple directions, multiple people said, Papatoetoe North. They came to us, we came to them, and they welcomed us. And if you look at the school data, it represents the super diversity of Auckland. The key strengths that you see in the box, those were found by an independent education review office before Understand Me ever started, that the school for this review had a culture of high expectations, powerful relationships with parents, whānau, and community that impacted positively learning outcomes and supported programs for children with different learning needs. The co-design that we used had multiple evolutions in our project. We started with a very structured approach in that pilot year, 2019, where we met and the parents signed up in advance, sometimes 2 weeks in advance. And we met with the group, a child, a whānau member, the keiko, and one of us, 3 times for each family. Then what we did, we wanted to move to something that was more fluid or everyday, because that's what we were about. And in that move to the everyday, it was based on what teachers were noticing from children and families. We ended up thinking of those as kind of pop-up stories, because as our trust built and our relationships built, a teacher would say to Marietta, I have a story, I have a child, I have a family. Marietta would call, who can come on Thursday at 11? So we were able to shift very quickly. And the final shift has to do with the transition of early childhood. We looked at family members at this multi-generational school, and we invited family members with a child who would be a future student at Papatoetoe North. I want to say that the stories that we are going to share, we have permissions from the parents and teachers for this presentation. So not out of context, but within the context of this presentation, including the recording, can stay intact. Meg Jacobs is going to first share its story of child and a family, followed by Jacoba with one of teachers, Marietta at the school level and teachers, and myself at the end with teacher educators and researchers. These stories represent the tensions that emerge through and in storied conversations. We invite for you to engage with those tensions.
The following storied conversation provides a glimpse of the valued family knowledge of a Fijian mother, Api, and her children, Nancy and Ethelyn, shared with Kavita, Nancy's teacher, and I in April of 2022. Nancy was 8 years old, and Ethelyn had just turned 5 years old at the time of this storied conversation. So Ethelyn was very excited to be along and have a preview to school. The words of Api, Nancy, Ethelyn, and Kavita will be read aloud to amplify their voices in this presentation. Api is a mother and a teacher to her children. Api wants them to grow up strong in their Fijian language and culture.
So I take them to Fijian church. They speak in Fijian. It's good, and I am also involved in Fijian communities for the benefit of children, because really when you learn English-speaking country and every day they communicate in English. So language is something I really encourage because it really identifies who you are and where we come from.
Ethelyn wanted to talk about the people she calls her church family.
There is a girl, Leilani, at church, and it is Kevin and Melissa and Dukes and Tondi and the dad.
Nancy's eyes lit up as she shared what they do in church, and Kavita shared a funny story about Nancy in response.
In church, we read the Bible, sing songs. Also, there's a time when all the kids come up and all the grown-ups pray for us.
One day, Nancy came to school and she said, Miss K, I had a disturbed night. I said, what happened? Nancy said, Mom and Dad were praying too loudly for me.
Nancy's favorite Bible verse is from Jeremiah.
In the Bible, they mostly love, and it's called Jeremiah verse 3. Call to me and I will answer you, and I will tell you things that you did not know.
5-year-old Ethelyn wanted to share a verse too.
And there is another Bible verse about I am a hard worker.
Api shared that the family gathers every evening at 7 p.m. for family devotions.
At home, we do family devotions. So we all have a lead. And so they do that to lead our prayer meetings and share your day. That is so important. I really encourage their life so they know me and my husband are really interested in their day school. That is something I really believe in, to support the children with their education, and whatever means, always tell them, be grateful with things.
Api teaches her children to draw on their spiritual knowledge and family cultural practices as a source of strength, especially when their parents are not beside them.
Remember that if I'm not in school, remember if Mummy and Daddy are not there, someone will say a silent prayer to Jesus. We might not see him, but he is there, and you know the Bible. Meditate the Bible verses, and it is very powerful. That is why they know the verses they have to say, because I told them the word of God is very powerful. It is something that you have to know.
Api trusts that Kavita and Papa Toi Toi North School will protect Nancy and the gifts she carries.
All the day I go past, it is like part of the family now. Your relationship with the teachers, that is something I believe is important too. When you have a close relationship and trust there, confident on how to communicate with the children.
So that gives you peace of mind too.
That is something that always makes me cry as a mother, because I know her journey. The strength that she has every day to come looking forward to a new day to come to school. It is something that helps me to be a humble mother, to have patience on how she carry her life on every day, every morning, and wake up to another day. She is still there. That is why I really love my children to come to her, to Miss Kay, and how Nancy has come this far. It is something I'm so thankful for, like our God. That is why I am teaching her the basics of Christianity.
Leo Pepe, Matapo, and Ravlich 2017 remind us that the 1996 version of Te Whāriki urged us to acknowledge the spiritual dimensions of children's lives in culturally, socially, and individually appropriate ways. Nancy and Ethelyn carry stories from their family devotions and their Fijian church family and community. How might we notice, recognize, and respond to the spiritual dimension they carry? How can children be who they are, where they are?
Do you think teachers feel comfortable acknowledging the spirituality aspect of children and families?
I think that's a really interesting question to follow up with, in terms of how teachers feel about their own sense of spirituality as well. I can speak from the 1996 version of Te Whāriki, which reminds us that it's not only language, culture, and identity, but spirituality is a key feature of that. But I guess with the new iteration, it's not as visible. And these are some of the implications that we see with shifting and changing priorities in curriculum. I feel that it's important to recognize, just coming back to the story shared, how much it means to the mother. And her sense of connection with her daughter in the context of the school. And I think that's one example of spirituality that's lived and also shared with the teacher. But we might also think about how teachers bring their spiritual selves into these conversations as well. All right, so the whale as a pedagogy. Although I'm new to the school, I've known you for a long time. And when you enter my space, I watch you quietly, intently, waiting for you to notice me. I am present in the everyday, from the playground conversations and in-depth dialogues that carry story and meaning making. I have my own teaching philosophy, which some might say to be unconventional, as things are not always as they seem. I like to prioritize relationships, not only with people, but with place, with history and culture and language and spirituality. My space is a shared space, a space of presence and a space for community and a space of belonging. Now, I've heard teachers say that sometimes they feel they have to leave their language, culture, and being at the door. But what if there were no doors? What if our spaces of learning ebbed and flowed like the winds that move freely through and around us? The child that leaps in, or the child searching for a moment of quiet reflection, continually in relationship with the world. What if I told you I have my own pedagogy, that I teach through the nuances of the po, the whala you sit on, the laupapa, the wood that holds you, and the awha, the threads that bind. Albert Rafiti, a Pacific architectural expert, reminds us of the potential of our Pacific architectural heritage in generating new configurations of village connection. What does it mean to access the whale in your everyday experience? The whale as a spatial dimension of the village, re-embedding its value and meaning. So how do we notice, recognize, and respond? Through the whale pedagogy, your storied conversations become our storied conversations, catching threads from one to another, creating new ties that bind and sustain understanding. Removing the doors, we might think about languages and literacies reconceptualized through storied conversations. The threads in curriculum and pedagogy holding space for spiritual, cultural, and embodied knowing. So I ask, what if there were no doors?
I'm reminded of when Stan, the school principal, shared the original intention of the whale. The presence of the whale was meant to say to families, come and stay a while.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they've been at the school strategically placed by the gates, every entrance point, for that very purpose, for parents coming early, place to sit, connect, and to wait for their kids.
So remind us, Marietta, how many whales do you have around the school?
2, 3, 4, 5, about 5 or 6.
Yeah.
Yep. 3 at each gate, close to the gate areas, and then a few other stops here around the middle of the school. And the kids love it too, and teachers love it in hot weather. So Papatoetoe North School has been exploring the Samoan afa. That's the image that you see behind all of us, particularly the mealy part of the process in making the afa, as an analogy of the connections and the connecting that would take for us as a staff in our relationship building, but also in our relationships with our community. The afa is, I've got one here, the afa is a Samoan cord or rope. It is sturdy, strong, and it was around long before nails and super glue was invented. Our people used it for everyday use, as well as for building our whale, joining the woods together, our roofs, and also for creating elaborate designs if they were going to be really, really fancy and building great big whales. Afa was used both on land and on the seas. So those on canoes would have it. It is waterproof, waterworthy, and it had so many uses. And one of the areas, there's so many processes in making, well, not so many, but there are about 6 processes, key processes and steps in the process of making the afa. But the one that has really stuck with us as a school is the process where they mealy the afa. And mealy simply means to rub together. You might hear performances around our country where the kids or young people will go mealy, mealy, mealy. It's kind of like that, but not quite exactly the same. But in the days of old, when the men would meet to have discussions and talks, they would sit cross-legged on the floor, and during that time, the men would talk, and at the same time, they would select a few strands of the husk of the fiber that's been dried, and they would mealy it on their thigh. They would rub it so that it would join and would bind in their in creating these longer strands. And with that, they would then plait and make this sturdy, strong, natural resource of the afa that was used by Samoans everywhere. And so as a school, we get that there are treasures that our kids bring with them, that the families that come, that are behind the children that are in schools hold. And for us, it's looking for the strands. It's always taking the strands and milling together what we think might belong together in our efforts to unearth what is not known in what's not known, but we know it's in there, but what we can't see yet, that's within the tamariki as they come to school. And that is why we are exploring the whole analogy of afa as a school community.
Kia ora, Marietta. Are the knowings the strands we mile to make the afa? The knowings?
Yeah.
And what if we don't know? What if the knowings aren't visible? What if we have to move toward what we don't know to find them?
I just want to ask too, Marietta, to be able to bring this aspect of your Samoan culture into this work that you do in the storied conversation, but also in your leadership, like, how does that make you feel?
I think, it's like, as an adult, I understand now the treasures within my culture that I never understood as a kid. And I see that over and over as children come in. They don't see it, but now I can see it as an adult. And I can take different aspects that are presented to us through the Ministry of Education, what we have to do as a school. And it's selecting the strands that I think with my colleagues, and as we talk together, I think if we did this in reading and this and that, we melee these together, this is going to strengthen our kids' learning. So for us, it's looking out for those strands, for those things that that may work together. I love the question about the what if you don't know, and that, yeah, we don't know. But what we do know from the analogy of the afa is the organicness of it, the sustainable thing about the afa, and it's sturdy and long lasting, and its usefulness. So somehow, some way, it's in there. If that makes sense.
What I see in a transition is that the teachers that we have had the privilege to work with are increasingly sort of attending to the children. They're noticing and selecting those strands that the children are bringing and weaving them into the school curriculum, strengthening what is already doing. I see those noticings becoming sort of amplified because they call us up with more stories.
And teachers starting children's learning in the knowing. With what the children know. That's what we try to do.
I left the storied conversation earlier this year, and I was quite taken by the experience. Something in the interactions with Troy, a 7-year-old Maori boy, his mother, Misty, and his teacher, Delina, opened up a space for the four of us to talk about and see Troy's gifts. This storied conversation among the four of us, it had no warm-up. It wasn't a slow starter. Troy was the center of our listening from the beginning. He started talking about this deep knowledge of Egypt, referring to objects and people in the terminology. He then transitioned and he said, I want you to know what I want to be as an archaeologist. And he then took that desire about, without interruption, without any prodding, just from the listening. And he talked about how he was so curious about everything. The weekend prior to our conversation, Papa Jack took the family and Troy on a visit to the Auckland War Memorial Museum, and to see the great-grandfather's name, Pipi Maruniwi, on the wall in the World War I Hall of Memories. The storied conversation and others have had and lived inside of me. They have challenged my assumptions and biases and blind spots. I have continued to drill down on this question about what has enthralled me about this storied conversation. In the privacy of my own thoughts, I asked myself if it was about my expectations for a young Māori tamariki. Did Troy challenge my expectations? Was that what was unearthed for me? I was awed by Troy. The combination of his articulation with self-insight, but I have seen that capacity in young children before. As I continued to reflect on this experience, there was a connection within the conversation that the words on the transcript do not fully capture. Troy was a full player in this conversation with 3 adults. His level of engagement, capacity to relate, to acknowledge his own gifts about art and drawing and music, and have them named by this teacher and his mom without him feeling uncomfortable, but with humility. Coupled with Troy's insertions about mahi, about, he said, a whakatoki, about the hard work that he was engaged in and would be engaged in, and wanting to needing to learn more. He attributes part of this disposition to his participation at Papatoetoe North for 3 years in the haka. My takeaways as I returned from this storied conversation to a meeting at the university, my mind was full of this child, his teacher, his mom. The juxtaposition of the meeting with this conversation was jarring. Like a ticker tape, during that university meeting, like a ticker tape, a message kept rolling through my mind. We are not getting ready for this child. We, the Ministry of Education, teacher education, professional developers, and me. So much in the media and conversations are about deficits and about low achievement and children not being ready for school, that the dominant narrative is that deficit, low achievement. From this story, I can tell you, we are not getting ready for Troy. We are getting ready for different children. We need to get ready for the children we have. I have been talking to several close colleagues who will challenge me, not hold back, about the staying power of this story. For the time being, I believe that this story, combined with other stories, has filled me with hope for what is possible for the future. When tamariki, their whānau and kaeko come together in a center, in a school, that they are ready for Troy and Delina. Troy and Delina, the teacher, both called Papatoetoe North their second home. Delina said, the school found me, and she hopes to work the rest of her career at Papatoetoe. As a teacher educator, I have had paradigm shifts, and especially about I can never ever look at a child alone without their family. While I thought those things as a teacher, I have now opened my expansive pathway to make sure that I call myself to action, those in my teaching and in my research. At the end of this conversation, I turned to Troy and said, is there anything else that we should know about you as we close this conversation? And Troy said, I am kind. Troy closed the conversation with a karakia. So I ask, the children, or I make a statement, the children are ready. Are we?
Kia ora, Jan. Thank you for recognizing and the knowings, the layers of knowing in Troy's whānau through a strengths-based lens. And just thinking about teachers and how they reconcile when assessments position their noticing, our noticing within a deficit paradigm, and how we reconcile that tension in our work every day.
I think just thinking about the tensions and the ways in which teachers traverse the worlds of children and the worlds of curriculum and assessment, but also their own professional identity. I feel as though there's a constant remaking or a reconfiguring of sorts in terms of grappling with the different demands too as a teacher. Something that I'm really appreciative of from an early childhood perspective is the power of narrative assessment, you know, in our learning stories. And I think, you know, how can we make visible those powerful connections with the worlds that children bring into the education context? And how do we elevate that on all levels? I guess not just on the individual child's level, but the classroom level, the school level. But even for us entering in these spaces alongside tamariki and teachers, this is also an undoing of researcher identity, in my view. You know, it's to be able to share in these stories and to even make ourselves vulnerable, and that be okay, you know, in terms of those connections and relationality. And that's something for me personally that I'm in gratitude for, to Marietta and Papatoetoe North School. Yeah.
The new curriculum framework that Dr. Wayne Nata that has just recently gifted the country, in thinking about how the priority of Te Mataiho is about noticing, about observing, and that he also includes in that to look at the horizon. And when he's talking about that, the curriculum framework, the noticings can be where we are, but our goal, what's possible, is looking at the horizons. I think that curriculum framework, if it is enacted, which it is a call for action, it could be a way of taking us forward.
Kia ora koutou, that was I'll just take this off as well. Thank you so much for that. And Mariata, as you were beautifully describing the AFA, and I couldn't help but think that you as a group, as a collaborative research team, a resonance of that metaphor of the rubbing, because I know when you work collaboratively together, there's always a rubbing that goes on, and the strengthening and the knowing that you've brought together here for us this afternoon. It was just beautiful, just beautiful. There's so many lovely moments of the stories that you've shared with us that I've really taken with me, and the notion of what was it, the one of the stories of the children where the parents were praying far too loud, you know, those sorts of lovely little moments that you've shared with us, and then introducing us to Troy, who is very ready, as you say, Jan. He's ready. So thank you. And I've got a couple of questions, and we've got a question from Sina here as well, which she says is a very big question, and I totally agree with you, Sina, who's really enjoyed your presentation this afternoon. And there's so much I hope you're presenting elsewhere as well. There's so much richness here for us to think about. One of the things I wondered, and Mariata, I thought I might ask you first and then open it up, is when we think of knowledge and we think of how we need to know, and you story that beautifully, but sometimes something I became aware of a few years back is with Indigenous knowledge, is knowing that there are things also that we don't have the right to know, or we can't know, and how as teachers and leaders might we be comfortable with not knowing?
Yeah. See, our system, our school system is a Western system, and so it's a high value to know. You know, what did you just say in Samoan? What does it mean? You know, so I get that, but there are many times, you know, as a Samoan, I don't have to know. My father say something, that's it. I just go and do that, or that is the way we're going. And so there are these, you know, the question of how can teachers be comfortable. I think they're going to have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I don't think it's ever going to be, you know, comfortable. I don't think that exists, because I know for me, working in this system, in this a very non-Samoan system, I've had to learn, and I've had to be constantly uncomfortable in the ways, and now as an education leader, I have to, that is the space in which I work in, because it's not natural to me. And when it's not natural to you, there's always going to be an element of discomfort. But beyond the need to be comfortable is the desire to see our kids thrive, is the desire for our families, for the dream, to be a part of making the dream happen for our people. That's a bigger thing. And so I stay in what is not comfortable. So I suppose my answer is, how do you make them comfortable? This relationship, and learn to be comfortable with what is uncomfortable. Let that be the norm.
I love your response, Mariata. I totally do, because I think it's so important that we learn to exist with discomfort.
Yeah.
If we're ever going to learn anything. Yeah. Does anyone else want to speak to that? Jacoba?
Just be really brief with it, because I think it's a really important point from an Indigenous point of view, and that's realizing that there are tapu aspects to the nature of knowledge as well. And it's just understanding that there are, it's about how one negotiates the wā, and it requires relationality, and it requires time and space for understanding. So yeah, I just want to mention that, because it isn't about knowing everything when we talk about unearthing things, but it's about being open, you know, and it's about respecting and valuing that is important to different cultures and different and in different contexts. Another aspect of tapu is spirituality. You know, there are practices that are deeply spiritual that are also tapu. So, you know,
thanks, Jacoba. Yeah, totally with you there. And so I
just want to add one thing to that is, in our research group, we often in our conversations ask that question, like, is this something that we will share? Like we ask one another, even before we go back to the family, the child and the teacher. It's something we ask ourselves. So there are things that we wouldn't share or that we choose not to share, but we're sensitive. I think that's an important question that we do as researchers, choose carefully the strands.
Yeah, good point, Jan. So I just I've got another question here, but I'm going to shift to Sina, as I see we've got someone else who's put a question here too. Sina is asking, and it's very similar to the difficult one I wrote down, Sina. What do you think we need to address immediately? What I suppose we might describe that as, what is most urgent in your mind after this work that we need to address in our different education communities?
I'm sort of looking at Meg on this one.
Okay, Meg, are you ready? She's put you in there.
Well, I think it's no secret that there's an encroaching agenda that will impact on early childhood and is already being enacted in some spaces, that really situates knowledge as something that happens at school, and actually does quite a lot of erasure in terms of everything children carry with them. And so to think about Nancy and Ethelyn and how they learned about these precious texts from their family devotion time and from their Fijian church family and community, not for the sake of learning, not for the sake of outcomes, not for the sake of, you know, getting a mark or achieving. They learned those because they were in deep spiritual relation with and through people and places that are dear to them. And so I guess I would say, I would like us to shift away from, and I say this with deep respect for teachers and the constraints that you're under, which is why I asked the question of how assessments position us, how we shift away from what we're being told children should know and somehow amplify what they do know in response as a way of talking back.
Nice, Meg. So I guess it's engaging them in these sorts of conversations, listening to their stories. Yeah.
I remember, I don't know if, I do remember that it was with Marietta, and I believe it was Stan Tiatia, the principal, is they said they were grateful for us coming because we were documenting as witnesses what was occurring in their school that would not be visible otherwise. It wouldn't show, it may not show up in the quantifiable outcomes that Meg was referring to. So this is research. This is documenting what is occurring, and that it's a different way of looking and a different way, but they were grateful that we were providing that for them, with them.
Yeah, I love that with too, Jan. Yeah, so true. Now, Shu Yen has asked a question. I can see that we're running out of time. I know we've got a lot of fabulous teachers out there as well, and people who work in this area. And she's asking, what are the sorts of strategies that you might suggest to enable children to understand their culture better? So I'm going to ask our lovely panel here to respond to the question, but also participants, if you could put in the chat, perhaps, a response to Shu Yen. What are some of the great strategies that you're using in your communities of practice that enable children to understand their culture better? And I love Shu Yen also said meaningful strategies. So not just the tokenistic ones, but where they start to really engage in a meaningful way with aspects of their culture. So those participants out there, please put in your fabulous things that you are doing in practice. And Mariata, what are some of the awesome things that you're doing at Papatoetoe North to engage students in a meaningful way with their cultures?
One of the things that we tried to do, and COVID stopped us for a bit, but it's a thing in the past, is really to when we meet with our parents, we ask them, what does, if we're learning around the idea of well-being or environment, we ask the parents, well, what are the values that you're teaching that's important about environment at home with the kids? What's important to you? What does environment look like as a Niue, as a Tonga, as a Samoan? And I remember one time we asked that question to a group of parents, and they kept saying to us, what do you want us to, how do you want us to teach? What do you want us to teach here at school? And they said, we want our kids to teach them how to show respect. And then we realized that if we approach learning about the environment with the idea of respecting the environment rather than using the care for the environment, they both lead to the same thing. That was the language, that was the angle in which our families saw taking care of the environment, was to show respect, and that's how they teach the kids at home. That's just one way in which we found is really meaningful, but it takes the time to listen. And you as an educator have to zip, and you've got to turn these ones on, like listen.
Oh, Mariata, I can't agree more. Yeah, we do have to sometimes just stop talking as educators and start listening. Jacoba, would you have anything to add quickly before we go?
I just want to come back to the whale that I talked about. And I think it's also realizing that our teachers, from a cultural perspective, are our artifacts. So it's about creating space to engage with our artifacts in a way that allows the artifacts to teach us as well. And to realize too that, coming back to what Marietta was saying about sustainability and the afa, our environment is the teacher as well. There are a lot of non-human others that are part of the pedagogical relationship. So that's another way that I would think about being culturally inclusive. Yeah,
I love the story about the whale, and starting to think about the different ways that we can develop relationships with the non-material others in our communities. Yeah, I totally agree. And the sorts of different artifacts and stories that people bring into that space. So I think we are coming to a close there. And I'm sure Justine's there. I can see her smiling face in her photo. But I feel all filled up with your lovely, lovely stories this afternoon. And thank you so much, Justine, for inviting me to be part of this conversation. And I will see you all again. And thank you.
Right, Esther. And thank you, Marita, Jan, Meg, Jacoba, and Alison for sharing such rich and powerful stories with us this evening. And yeah, thank you also, Alison, for managing the technical aspects of the presentation so smoothly in the background. I need to apologise. Unfortunately, our chat was disabled, so no one was able to add a response when Esther asked. So I apologise for that. We'll work on that for next time. I'd also like to thank the families of Papatoetoe North Primary who have gifted us with a glimpse into their worlds through this research. The stories and conversations shared this evening speak really strongly to the principles of relationships, empowerment, holistic development, and family and community, which is so central to our early childhood curriculum, to whāriki. And I'm sure that this presentation is going to act as a provocation for those in the early childhood and the school sectors to think more deeply about how the lived experiences and stories of children and families can be woven into the fabric of learning and teaching to enrich the local curriculum and extend our everyday pedagogies. So ngā mihi nui ki a koutou. Thank you all very, very much. To our early childhood seminar series audience, if you wish to share or revisit this presentation, please check out our Early Childhood Seminar Series YouTube channel. The recording of the seminar will be available in a couple of days, and I'm sure you'll want to share it very widely with others. We look forward to seeing you all back for our final seminar for the year at the end of November, so please keep an eye on your inbox for the flyer and registration information. Thank you again for joining us this evening. I will now invite Marieta to close our session with a karakia. Kia ora, Marieta.
Unihia te pō whiri marama, tomokia te ao whatu tangata, tātai ki runga, tātai ki raro, tātai ahorau, haumie, huie, tai. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou. Ka kite.